So, you want to get into Toku. Maybe you've seen somebody tweet about it, or you've seen those Super Sentai DVDs in stores, or maybe even a friend is forcing it in your face. But there's one problem. You don't really know what any of this stuff is, or what it all means. Well, that's what this series is for. Welcome to Tokusatsu 101, your crash course in rubber-suited men fighting rubber-suited monsters. In this first episode, I'll be going over the history of Tokusatsu and giving a brief explanation of the genre as a whole. There won't be a huge jump of information here, just a quick rundown to give you a general idea of what Toku is. Now let's not dawdle and get right into things. Tokusatsu as a term comes from two separate Japanese words, tokusho and satsue, literally meaning special filming. In Japan, it's sort of a blanket term for anything that heavily utilizes special effects, but here in the Western fandom, it pretty much exclusively refers to things like Godzilla and Power Rangers. Toku's actually got some origins in kabuki theater, specifically the way they handled action scenes, as well as some influence from Western movies like King Kong and the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but its true birth was more recent, in the 1950s. Though there were a couple of movies prior, the original Godzilla from 1954 and its special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya, remember that name, are generally credited with creating the genre. Much of the techniques used in the film had never really been done before and had to be created by Tsuburaya, and many of them became staples of the genre and are still in use today. Most notably, suitmation, essentially the process of sticking a dude in a suit and having him act with miniatures, and sometimes another dude crammed in a suit. In the wake of Godzilla began what we call the kaiju boom, an era where a ton of Japanese movies featuring giant monsters were released. And for a while, giant monsters basically were Toku, but in the late 50s, superheroes started creeping into the genre with things like the Supergiant serials and Japan's first ever televised superhero, Moonlight Mask. Moonlight Mask is notable for not only being the first Japanese superhero show, but also the highest rated and the longest running at over 130 episodes. Something else I find really interesting about the show, Moonlight Mask's identity is not known even to the viewer. He certainly had one, and you could figure it out if you were paying attention, but it was never explicitly said who Moonlight Mask was. Jumping into the 60s, Toku on television got a little closer to its modern incarnation with the premiere of Ultra Q, the first in the Ultra series and brainchild of Eiji Tsuburaya, who had founded his own company after his work with the Godzilla films. Ultra Q aimed to give families the experience of a kaiju film in their homes every week, and sprinkled in a bit of mystery a la The Twilight Zone for some added appeal. And appeal it did. Ultra Q killed in the ratings, and quickly gained a sequel in Ultraman. Though technically not the first show of its kind, Ambassador Magma beat it to the punch by almost 2 weeks, Ultraman is responsible for creating the Kyodai or giant hero subgenre, where a normally human-sized character grows to massive proportions to fight giant monsters. Ultraman did even better in the ratings than Ultra Q had, ensuring the longevity of the Ultra franchise despite its on and off airing schedule, and cementing superheroes in Toku. Fast forward to the early 70s, and kaiju films are on a bit of a downslope with Godzilla and Gamera on ice, but on television, Toku thrives. The 70s were a huge time for Tokusatsu, where shows were just getting pumped out left and right by anybody who could even barely pull them off. Kikaider, Inazuman, Iron King, Fireman, Akumizer, Kyodai, Miraman, just a whole storm of the stuff. But the first major one comes from the brain of manga artist Shotaro Ishinomori, Kamen Rider. The original Karate Bugman premiered in 1971 and paved the way for that giant storm of Toku I mentioned. Part of said storm being even more Kamen Rider, but also another major Toku franchise. In 1975, heap dip in the Toku rush, Ishinomori created Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, the first in the Super Sentai series. Like its predecessors, Go Ranger was a massive success and brought about the birth of a new franchise. It's also the one Toku series most people here in the US are probably aware of due to it being adapted into Power Rangers. And it's about here that we mostly hit the point Toku is at today. The genre would see a hike in budgets in the late 70s thanks to Star Wars and begging from multiple companies, and other franchises would come into being with Metal Heroes in the 80s and Garo in the mid-2000s, but by this point, the heavy hitters have been established, and the only really big change that would come to Toku would be the shift from more episodic formats of the 1970s and 80s to the story-focused shows in the late 90s. And now, this introductory part to Toku 101 comes to an end. There's certainly more shows to talk about, like the aforementioned Garo and Metal Heroes, and the myriad of other Ishinomori shows, but I think I'll save those for another time. So, if you found anything I talked about here interesting, be sure to stick around, because there's more Toku 101 to come in the future, and plenty of Toku already on my channel. That's all for now, and I will see you guys next time.